Hello everyone, and I'd just like to say thank you for taking a few seconds out of your day to join us on this slice of the internet we call home, which is in fact a Warframe video. In today's video, we're taking a look at Melee. Yes, that core feature of Warframe that has through the years seen many changes to the way certain things work. But now, with Melee 3.0 finally rearing its head more and more, we're starting to see drastic changes which are altering the way we mod, utilize our melee weapons, and no more so now than with the old blood bringing massive game-changing alterations to the overall scaling functionality of all weapons. As another slight disclaimer, this is not your typical guide. The intent and purpose of this video is not necessarily to be the most descriptive or informative. It's more along the lines of something that I personally just wanted to do for the sake of showing where the state of Melee is currently. So whereas my normal guides are very informative, explanatory, and all that jazz, this will have some elements of that in, but it's more along the lines of personal opinion to create a forum of debate where we can discuss the state of Melee and, you know, criticize DE for changing things. Gah! We all hate change, don't we? To start things off, it would be prudent to talk about the general state of Melee as a whole, since the Old Blood rustled everyone's jimmies. And if you want more information about the Old Blood and everything that it brought and changed, then I'd recommend taking a look at the link in the description, as it'll go through all the things that have changed and everything that's been made since then. So as it stands, scalability and stupidly high levels is now impossible. And let me elaborate more on this, as this has been the biggest focus everyone has had. Whereas before, with the way you would initially build your combo counter and gain benefits from stacking multiplicative mods, allowing your damage to truly never stop building, so long as you kept your combo counter building, by relentlessly murdering people, that in turn meant you could meet damage requirements for enemies of every level and thus allow you to run missions indefinitely if you knew what you were doing. That is no longer the case. That is what it used to be. So we're now going to take a look at what it is now. Now, however, it's very different. The changes to the combo counter and certain mods, such as Condition Overload and Blood Rush and the like, have all made it to the point where it's nearly impossible to get your damage scaling beyond a certain level. And a lot of people seem to think that's bad. It's not. So it's very unlikely you're going to see people being able to kill enemies upwards of level 300 without some rather gimmicky builds or shenanigans, or mashing their face against those enemies for a prolonged period of time. But whereas the endurance runs and scalabilities may be out the window, the variety of weapons and the more variety of viable weapons that have come into play are much more noticeable now. Before, there would be maybe one or two weapons that almost everyone would use, but now almost every single weapon you can think of is now much more potent, and the potency of all weapons is substantially higher than it ever has been. If you want to TLDR this whole thing, in short, the changes have lowered the damage ceiling, or rather, it has actually given us a ceiling to start with, and additionally raised the base level and base damage of most types of weapons. A lot of these changes are made to allow almost every melee weapon in the game to now deal substantial amounts of damage, so things that used to be really unoptimal and kind of are now amazingly powerful, such as Fang Prime. Never thought I'd say the word Fang and amazing in the same sentence, but there you go, that's what the melee system's done. Additionally, the changes have also added an emphasis to heavy attacks. What with certain crit mods now benefiting from double their effectiveness when used on heavy attacks, specifically with the crit mods. Heavy attacks are variable across all different attack styles and different stance mods, so it's going to be down to personal research as to which heavy attacks you prefer the most. And different heavy attacks will definitely seem more potent and more powerful than others. And this is where a lot of the fun lies, as you can now test out different styles and different heavy attacks to see how you want to get the best kind of damage out there. Although in my personal opinion, focusing on heavy attacks, it kinda tunnel visions you into playing in a very specific style, and you know, not everybody's going to like doing that. But hey, there's a bit of added damage in there if you really want to push things forward. So maybe you'll end up just using your heavy attacks to take out big enemies. Who knows? Warframe's a very versatile and open-ended machine, so it's kind of down to you how you want to incorporate these new heavy attacks into your system. So let's now focus on making your melee weapons good. Starting with modding mentality. The update has made it so that almost all form of modding will be relevant in some way or another. Crit builds are still critty with double the potency on heavy attacks. Your crit builds still are just as powerful for dealing huge amounts of initial damage for crit heavy weapons. It's always worth making sure you have at least true steel or an organ shatter to base your damage on. Even though Blood Rush is now only additive, it is still most certainly worth using, as it will still help to up the damage quite substantially. Especially as your combo counter now is able to reach up to a 12 times modifier. Do not let people dissuade you. Just because they say a mod has been nerfed does not mean that it is useless. That is very much the case with things like Blood Rush and Condition Overload, but we'll talk more about that later. One thing when it comes to crit builds is the Gladiator mod set. I can't stress this enough. These Gladiator mods have become more important now than ever. The Gladiator set bonus gives bonus crit chance to every attack, every stack of your combo modifier you gain. And seeing as it gets bigger, the more of the Gladiator set you use, the better this becomes. If you can fit the others in there, that is. A lot of people will use Deconstructor on a Sentinel to sort of like a stat stick, allowing them to have all their Gladiator mods equipped without necessarily impacting their regular build types. This, in short, is kind of where a lot of people are getting their scalability from, combining this with things like Blood Rush, Condition Overload. Essentially, the focus has been pulled away from relying on scalability from one or two mods and has now been pushed into relying on scalability through versatility of mods and trying to eke out more damage where possible. And really, this is kind of where this whole update has come from. It's made people have to put more effort and put a bit more time into their builds rather than just relying on the same mods all over the place. It's worth keeping in mind the idea of leveling mods and equipping mods is still the be-all and end-all of how to make weapons powerful. Focusing on simplicity is always the key, and I cannot overstate this enough. Trying to overcomplicate things if you're new will likely just end up frustrating you, so for the newer player, all you need to get into the habit of is, well, just looking at raw numbers. Trust me, this helps a lot. Typical modding etiquette, as it always has been, is something you learn over time, and getting a bit annoyed over modding is something that naturally happens when you're new to the game. But understanding modding and being able to have modding etiquette is something that will increase and improve your potency across the board. As an example, a typical crit build will look something like this. Again, in almost every build you're going to want to do, you're going to want Pressure Point. Pressure Point is the standard, hey look, it's damage mod. That will give you guaranteed damage across the board. As mentioned earlier, using things like Organ Shatter and the True Steel mod will allow you to get that base amount of crit damage. These are very obviously crit and damage, therefore more damage. And this is where modding mentality comes into play. And after that, the world's your oyster. There is no wrong answer in Warframe. So long as you understand the basic sentimentality behind damage, you can understand that more damage equals more damage. Duh. So at this point, a lot of people will put an element in there such as viral, corrosive by combining elements together. Some people will even compound the crit even more by using the Gladiator set. But in essence, you can then synergize this with attack speed using things like Berserker or Gladiator Vice. Gladiator Vice being part of the Gladiator set will then help you with that combo, the combo of the set bonus that you're looking for. And in short, you just want to make sure that you're attacking as fast as possible with as much crit chance as possible. Now, you might be saying, well, Makari, isn't that obvious? And that's because it is. One of the biggest complaints I often get, and one of the biggest criticisms I always see people making, is the fact that they don't understand where they're going wrong. And that is simply down to the fact that they overcomplicate things. People start looking at other people who are killing level 300 enemies, and they try to replicate what they're doing without understanding the semantics. And realistically, the only way to get to that point is by starting with the basics. So rather than trying to push yourself hard to kill level 300 enemies, push yourself to go with a lower level build first, and then build up to it, because then you'll learn as you go. The TLDR and the best way to look at crit builds is like thus. They do a lot of high initial damage and can still scale quite nicely at any given time. When looking at what weapons you want crit on, so long as the said weapon has above a 2x crit modifier and above 15 to 20% crit chance, then it can most certainly be built for crit. This is the rule of thumb when going for crit weapons as a whole. Keep in mind though that all this is personal preference. Yes, words are hard, and nothing we say here should dissuade you from testing out a wider variety of builds and any other weapons where possible. But it's usually a common sense thing that crit weapons should need crit mods. Status builds are relatively the same as they've always been. On weapons that have default status types, such as the Silver and Aegis, it's always worth making sure you use Condition Overload, as it benefits greatly from status weapons. Then making sure you go for an element type, even on crit builds, you still want to make sure you have an element in there, as elements modding is multiplicative across all the damage types you have. You'll find that the status type weapons will be something that are slightly more complex in the long run, but offer much more versatility and possibility for side grading later, and are generally not so heavy on former requirements, as there are a much wider variety of status type mods you can use. In a typical status build, yes, you still definitely want to use Pressure Point. However, if you have a weapon with a very high status chance or a default status of some kind, like the Silver and Aegis, then you can in some respects, replace Pressure Point with Condition Overload, as the quicker you build up the stacks on Condition Overload, it will get above the damage threshold of Pressure Point, but that is a personal preference thing, and you should do what you so choose with this. Once you've got that down, and once you've made your decision on what you're doing with that, you can then look at an element type. It is always worth trying to synergize elements where possible, viral, corrosive, all that jazz. Making sure you get 2 elements on there to make a combined element is definitely the way to go. Sometimes with a weapon having a default status type, you can even get 2 on there. If you want to make sure that you're dealing the most amount of status procs possible, you'll be looking to use the 60/60 status type mods in order to push your status higher. However, if you're looking to just do more raw damage, or if your weapon already has a good status chance and you don't feel like you need to improve that further, then putting on the raw 90 status mods is generally the way to go. I personally prefer raw damage, but a lot of people would like to deal status chances more efficiently. Because most pure status weapons don't have that much crit chance, more often than not, Berserker is still okay here, but you then have Gladiator Vice, which can still be used. Keeping in mind that just because you have a status weapon does not mean you won't be critting. Any weapon, even with 1% crit chance, can still crit. So using a Berserker may not be as efficient, but you'll still get the benefit from it. One of the biggest things that has changed, and this is honestly one of the most impactful changes that has come with the new melee rework, is the ideology of your combo counter and maintaining it for as long as possible. Now that you can stack it up to 12 times, you can actually get much more potency out of stackable mods, such as your Weeping Wounds, your Blood Rush, and all that jazz. So now more so than ever, mods such as Gladiator Rush, Drifting Contact, the ones that increase your combo duration, will have a much larger impact, especially on your status builds more than anything else, because you get much more potency from these mods in status builds generally. I mean, in general, you always want to keep up your combo duration for as much as possible, especially with how much it incorporates into your heavy attacks now. So relying on mods such as your Gladiator Rush, Drifting Contact, and Body Count, this will help you a lot. In fact, my personal recommendation would be Gladiator Rush for crit builds, because it gives you crit damage, and Drifting Contact for your status builds. Body Count is also a good fallback as well if that's all you have. So once you've gotten to grips with crit builds and status builds, then you should try pushing yourself towards making hybrid builds. This is something that almost any weapon can achieve, especially with the new melee system, and honestly, with how things have panned out, this new melee system has only reinforced the idea that hybrid builds are sort of the end goal of where you want to be with your melee weapons. Unless you have like 0 initial status chance or a ridiculously low crit chance. In short, play to the strength of the weapon, and if a hybrid build feels possible, definitely try to aim for it. If worse comes to worse, you can always fall back to the previous builds. That is the joy of Warframe. It is explorative and experimental in nature, and encourages a rewarding system for when you try to experiment. So do it. Experiment. Try new things. Without going into too much depth, as I feel like this might go out of the depth of knowledge for a lot of people watching this video, hybrid builds, in short, are kind of what you would imagine. They're a hybrid of what you would test with on the basic level of a crit build and the basic level of a status build. Having things like Blood Rush and Weeping Wounds in the same build is kind of a go-to, alongside Condition Overload, Pressure Point, and then an element type of some kind. Sometimes, depending on the weapon and the stance you're using, there will be variations in this, but realistically, so long as you have an element of crit and an element of status within these builds, you'll find a good synergy between them. And it can kind of depend how much weighted into status or crit they are as to what you focus. For example, if you have a very crit-heavy weapon, you might not need to mod as heavily into status or make much of a priority for it. It kind of comes down to personal understanding, and this is why I'm saying this is probably not the best of things to focus on for someone unless you understand how crit and status builds work in their individuality. One final thing that has changed with the new system is that range is different than it has ever been. All weapons are generally hitting harder than they ever have off the outset, and that's good because more damage is nice and it helps kill things quicker. But now range scales in a very different way, and it's worth taking this into consideration when looking at modding and how you use your weapons. Whereas before, smaller melee weapons would barely benefit from having range mods on them, now with the way range scales, it's almost paramount that on smaller weapons you have put reach on them, or some kind of range mod or riven to help push them further. Range, in short, is... yeah, get it? Short, that's a pun. Range, in short, is a pivotal aspect to the way you deal damage in the game, as if you hit things from further away, you're going to build your combo counter much more efficiently. Shorter weapons always struggled with this, as the range would never scale with them efficiently. But all you need to know now is that range has much more impact on smaller weapons, while still affecting large weapons as well. So in short, This is why smaller weapons have become much more efficient, is because they benefit much more from mods they otherwise never have done. So where we are at with Melee currently, in my personal opinion, is a very strong place. From everything we've lost, we've gained much more. And I think this comes down to people just complaining too much about change. Change when it comes to Warframe is inevitable. And we have to realize that the game has been out for a very long time. And anytime something has been out, things have to change to innovate on what already exists. If we maintain the same threshold for the entire time, yes, it keeps the status quo, but people will want new things. And with how Warframe has been tailoring more towards the new players want shiny things. They want to feel like epic ninjas, like we've mentioned. The way it was before, yeah, it was great. We felt powerful, but it felt very linear. It felt very stagnant after a while. There was no ingenuity. There was no attempt to make things divisive. You didn't want to try new weapons. You would pick up the best thing and then you'd stick with it. And people would just feel lackluster when they tried weaker weapons, so they never would then pick them up again. And of course, word of mouth, when one person thinks something's bad, everyone thinks something's bad. So now, I like the fact we are able to pick up any weapon and enjoy it. And I personally can't wait to see what else comes of the Melee system. But what do you guys think? Do you guys like the new Melee system? I'd love to know your comment in the comments down below, what you think could possibly be changed, what they could do to maybe make it better, or whether you just agree with the way it's going. I mean, if anything, I honestly think that we have gotten a bit of a complain culture within the community. And as much as I hate that, you know, it's a natural thing. Not everyone is going to agree with it, but as long as we can enjoy the game, that is what counts. I don't think we should let one small part of the game be the reason why we no longer enjoy it. That's maybe something for a different video, though. So anyway, if you guys have liked this video, if you want to be part of these videos in the future, maybe come by the Twitch channel, which will be linked down below, and you can join these fellow top hatters that have been joining me and berating me in the Clan Dojo, and maybe you can even be part of the videos in the future. So thank you very much for watching, guys. I hope you've liked this video. It's definitely been a bit of a different tangent, and we're going to have very similar to the videos to this in the future. In fact, I think the next one isn't even Warframe related. Shocker! Anyway, thank you for watching. I'll see all you top hatters in the next video. Ta-ra!